Hey there, welcome to episode 148 of Mike's Collection. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that I'm going to be talking about today is Masters of the Universe Origins Wave 6. So there are 4 figures in this new wave of Motu Origins. I have previously posted videos where I reviewed waves 1 to 5, as well as some box sets, some deluxe figures, and Castle Grayskull. So I'm a big fan of this line. I'm trying to collect it all. They're not making it easy with some of the exclusives and stuff, but for the most part, if you watch my video series on these, you'll get a pretty good idea of what most of the figures are all about. So yeah, I guess without any further ado, why don't we just dive in and take a look at the figures. So the first figure we're going to look at from Wave 6 is Webstor. So he is the spider-themed evil warrior. The original figure was released back in 1984, and neither me or my older brother Doug, who I grew up sharing a room with and collecting toys with, neither of us had Webstor. The funny thing is, I do have the vintage Webstor in my collection, and I can't recall where he came from. Another interesting thing about him is that I don't know how long I've had him. I'm not sure if I picked him up in my adult life, or maybe it was like late into my childhood after I wasn't really playing with Masters of the Universe anymore. I honestly can't recall. But we'll take a look at him in a second. But first, let's take a closer look at this figure here. So even though he's a spider-themed guy, and you get that impression a little bit because he's got multiple eyes, but really he's only got 4 eyes, and I think spiders are supposed to have 8. So yeah, it's kind of a weird design because he's got like a pig nose, and then he's got these fangs, and then he's got these like scales on his head, which is very lizard-like. Like he's by no means just a humanoid spider, which you think would be the obvious route for a spider-themed guy like this. And he also doesn't even spin his own like natural webs. You would think maybe they would find a way to pull string out of his forearms or something. But instead he's got this kind of backpack, like he's a mountain climber, with this grappling hook. So you can throw this grappling hook over the side of Castle Grayskull, and the idea is you pull on this string on the bottom, and he would rappel up. Now I've got the string all kind of tied around his arm here to get it out of the way, because I don't know if there's an obvious way to tuck this somewhere, but like, yeah, you'll see if I pull this the string here, the grappling hook goes right through. So you could have him kind of propelling along the rope, and that's the idea. So very interesting design. And once you take off his backpack, he pretty much loses any spiderisms, as you know, he doesn't have extra legs, he barely has extra eyes, he's got the snout. Now, the design on his chest, that looks kind of like the design that I believe you might see on a Black Widow spider or something. So again, that's a little spidery. But his colors don't really say spidery. I don't know of any blue spiders that exist. You think they would have went with black. But that's what makes Masters of the Universe Origins, well, that's just what makes Masters of the Universe so fun, is even from back in the vintage line, the characters were pretty goofy and weird, and they didn't seem like they belonged together. You had robots and cowboys and ape men and warriors and wizards and scientists. It was a very weird toy line, and that's why people love it so much. So besides the backpack, which comes off, you can see it's got little snaps. So I haven't taken this off yet, but I'm sure it comes off pretty easily. And then he would have pretty standard pieces that we've seen already. Masters of the Universe, even back in its earliest days, was known for reusing parts. So, you know, the humans and even most of the monsters probably share the same chest. There was like the standard, like kind of bare chest. And then if they have arms like this with this spiky protrusions on their forearms, which is what like Skeletor had and Whiplash might have had. Same as the legs. They've got the monster feet with the 3 toes, or they would have had the humanoid boots. But a lot of shared parts. He's got the same shorts as He-Man and a ton of other characters. But besides all that, he's got a cool little laser gun too. I'm not sure if we've seen that before in the Origins line. I don't know if he shared that with anyone else. But it's a cool accessory, and he's had that for a while in the various iterations of Webstor. So yeah, let me bring up the vintage one. which I mentioned I do have. Now, the funny thing about this is I did know this was in my collection, and I've had it around for a while. But it wasn't, it wasn't until I literally sat down to do this video just right now. I went to grab these figures. I was getting ready to do my side-by-side, and I realized that I had the wrong armor for him. For as long as this guy's been sitting around in my collection, and mind you, like, so I haven't had this from childhood, but I know I've had it for longer than I can remember where it came from. He's never been on display in my collection. I don't really have my vintage figures on display. Most of them are kind of busted up. You see their legs, they kind of want to go like that. There's an elastic in there, and it doesn't make for good standing up. So that's part of the reason why they're not on display. I think some people make custom stands for these guys where you can tuck their feet into a little like display base that holds them in place. If I was going to display these, I'd have to buy some of those because, yeah, this guy's legs are, pretty messed up, and I don't think there's any way to really fix them. But anyway, I didn't notice until I got him out here that he has the wrong armor on here. So I don't know why I never noticed that, but he should have the harness with the rope, and he should have that Black Widow symbol on there. What he's wearing is the black version of Zodak's armor that in the vintage toy line, this came in a weapons pack. So Mattel would sell these just packages of extra weapons and armor and stuff, usually things that were already released with other figures, often repainted in different colors. I guess they knew because kids would lose that stuff. And also it's just an opportunity for some kids to customize if they preferred to have their Zodak with black armor or their Beastman with yellow armor instead of red, they could have done that. So yeah, never realized that before, but that's what I've got on my Webstor here. But yeah, if you look at these guys side by side, like they're very similar. Like the sculpt, it's nearly identical. This guy's in a much brighter blue. He really popped on the shelf, where this guy's, a little flatter in color, and he's doing some yellowing here. You can see on his chest, it doesn't match the head and arms. That's just because it's yellowed with age. But otherwise, very similar designs. Now, I sometimes take for granted that this could be somebody's first video watching this, so I don't really like to go over all the articulation, but I might as well do it quickly here since this is the first figure we're talking about. So with Origins, they kind of went back to basics. They modeled them after the vintage toys, but you see here he's got a lot more points of articulation. So you see here he swivels at the boot, his ankle rocks forward and backward and side to side. He's got knees, so he can stand up a little taller than the vintage figures, which were stuck in a squatty position. His legs are not on an elastic, so he can do the splits, but then you can bring them back into the center very easily. He's got elbows, and he's got wrists with good movement there. He's got the shoulders with good movement, so he can get his arms right out like that. And then the head is on a ball joint, so he can look all over the place. So by comparison, if you look at the vintage figure, the arms only go forward and backward. There's no opportunity for him to put his arms out like that. His head just side to side. You can't look up or down. He swivels at the waist, but you can't hold it that way. So this guy, I can pose him if he wants to do that. He can. Whereas most vintage figures had the action punch feature, so you punch him like that and he swings back in place. So yeah, you can't really pose him permanently at the side. And then also he's got that elasticy waist, so his legs kind of go goofy like that. He also doesn't have any articulation at the knee, at the ankle, or at the boot swivel. So big improvement with the newer figures. Now just for a couple more comparisons before we move on to the next figure. So after the vintage line, Masters Universe came back in 2002 with a new cartoon and a new toy line, and it was very kind of like anime inspired, very stylized. I really liked the 2002 designs. Unfortunately, it got cut short, both the cartoon and the toy line, so they didn't get to go very deep. We didn't get all the characters. With Webstor, though, what they did is after the action figure line ended, they produced a series of action figure sized statues, which they called staction figures, because they're kind of a cross between statues and action figures because you could display them with your action figures, and most people couldn't even tell the difference. It's just they didn't have any points of articulation. So they produced some of the characters that they never had an opportunity to produce in toy form. And so we got Webstor in the Staction figure line, and he looks very cool. And this is the first time they really spidered him up a little bit more. They gave him actual extra legs and additional extra eyes. So it made him a lot more spider-like than the vintage and the now Origins figures. I never got that Staction figure, unfortunately. They were very hard to find in my area. But when the Classics line came out, so Webstor, so the first one came out, this guy, he came out in 84. When the Origins line started in 2008, we got Webstor in the second year in 2009. And most of the Classics figures were modeled after the vintage toy line, but sometimes they borrowed from other media, such as the 2002 toy line. So you see here the Classics Webstor, he's similar, and he's not as like hunched over and as creepy as the 2002 one, but they did give him these extra legs. So he now has 8 appendages with his regular arms and legs, and then these 4 extra arms, which have some articulation, and they're all attached to his backpack. He also has the additional eyes. So now he has 6 eyes instead of 4 anyway. So a very cool design. I really like this one a lot. But yeah, with the Origins line, we're kind of going back to basics. It's a lot closer to the vintage figure that we had in the 80s. And yeah, I'm a big fan. Looks really cool. So next up, we're going to take a look at Stinkor. So he was originally released back in 1985 when the Origins line came out. There was a version released of him in 2012. Like Webstor, Stinkor appeared as part of the 2002 series, but he never got an action figure in that 2002 line. But he did get a Staction figure. And yeah, now he's appearing in the Origins line with this brand new figure. And I think it's pretty great. Stinkor is one of my all-time favorite Masters of the Universe characters. So let's take a closer look at him. So he is a skunk man, and kind of like Webstor, if you asked anybody to design a humanoid skunk, you'd think they would go to the source material and make a skunk standing up on hind legs or something. Anyway, Stinkor does not look like a skunk. He's got like no real nose to speak of. He's got these crazy bugged out yellow eyes and this mouth like a fish. Like he's weird and he's creepy. And yeah, again, that's just part of the weirdness of Masters of the Universe. He's got this orange armor with this little piece there to kind of cover his mouth and nose, I guess, to help him from smelling his own stink, perhaps. He's got this blue shield as an accessory. And just like with Webstor, you see he's got the same shorts, he's got the same 3-toed boots. So shares a lot of the same parts. The armor is removable. He's got all the same articulation. So just great stuff. So if I bring out the vintage Stinkor, now this guy's missing his armor as well. And I don't have any armor to put on him, so he's just rocking the bare chest right now. But you can see that face on him. He's still got the weird kind of fishy mouth with the bugged out yellow eyes. Very, very similar if we compare the two. So, they did a really good job of capturing that look. As far as like the paint on the arms, he's still got that white streak down the side, but otherwise he's basically a black figure. White streak down the back there as well. So, very similar. No major changes to this guy, I don't think, as far as design goes. Now, the interesting thing about Stinkor, and one of the reasons why he's one of my favorites, is not only do I like animal guys and like a skunk guy is pretty cool, and the vintage figure, its action feature was that it stunk. It actually had patchouli, like kind of put into the plastic to give it a funk. And I don't know if he still stinks now. I should have smelled him before, but that thing lasted for a long, long time. And this figure has the same action feature, although it is very mild compared to what this guy was. What I remember him as a kid is he really stunk. You open up the package and you smelled this guy right away. And then you would put him in a box and not get him out for a couple of weeks. You open him up and yeah, you'd smell him right away. This guy here, I barely notice. So I don't know if they knew that parents did not appreciate that back in the 80s. So they went with a very mild version this time. But the package does advertise him as having the stink feature. So yeah, one of the reasons why he's got such a bizarre look is not because they just asked some designer to say, hey, design a skunk guy, and they came up with this crazy thing. It's because they were using some cost-saving measures. And my all-time favorite character from the very first wave of Masters of the Universe in 1982 was Merman, who was a fishman. So this is Merman. And they just took Merman and they repainted him into Stinkor. So these are the vintage ones from 82 and from 85. And, you know, it's kind of mind-boggling that they got the okay for this. Like, that you would take a fish guy and just make the skunk guy the exact same. Like, you know, they didn't question that. Won't kids, you know, question this? Why does a skunk guy have a fish face? But they just went with it. And I kind of love Stinkor for that reason, because I already loved Merman. And I think it's really neat how they're kind of like, I don't know, long-lost brothers in some weird way or something. It's very, very bizarre. Anyway, just to, let me see. And this guy does stand a little better. You see his legs aren't quite as bad as Webstor's were, but I don't know if I can get him to stand on his own. No, I think I'm going to have to set him down here. So anyway, there's my vintage Merman. So in the Origins line, we got this Merman pretty early on. And you can see how similar they are. Not the exact same, but design-wise very similar. And they took this figure and they repainted him into this Stinkor. So just like the vintage line, even though I'm sure they had the dollars to put into the tooling if they wanted to say, let's actually make Stinkor look like a skunk with a snout and all that stuff this time around. They can't do it now. This is Stinkor. This is the Stinkor that everybody loves. So he's always just going to be this kind of fishy repaint of Merman, which I think is kind of great. All right, so let's get my Mermans out of here. So there's Origins. There's Vintage. Now, first I guess I'll bring up the Classics one. So this is Classics from 2012. So you can see he's a little different. They changed up the design a little bit, and this head is not the exact same as the Classics Merman. So for the first time, Stinkor has an original head sculpt, but it's still clearly modeled after that vintage design. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that it is original now, but still similar. And the armor, you see how that's all similar. He's still got the blue shield. He's got these kind of tanks on the back there. All very cool. I like this figure a lot. Now, I mentioned the 2002 Staction figure, and I do have that here too, and this is a really great design. So this one, you can see, this is when he got his first original head sculpt, which the Classics line borrowed from. They took some of the design elements. This is the first time he got those big canisters, those tanks with all these old dials and stuff, so they borrowed that for the Classics line as well. So just a lot more detailed design, a lot more unique pieces that make Stinkor his own character. He also has the blue shield here, which you can attach to his armor as well. So yeah, very cool figure. Really love Stinkor, and I'm really happy to get this new version of him. So next up, we've got this figure that they call Lords of Power Beastman. So Beastman is one of the original Masters of the Universe characters. The original one was released back in 1982 in the very first wave of figures. He was included in the 2002 relaunch, and he was one of the very first figures to be included in the Origins line. He came out in 2008. So yeah, this is a classic character, a beloved character. He was featured heavily in the Filmation cartoon of the 80s. So yeah, Beastman is a very well-known character. The toy design, you know, it shared a lot of design elements with the cartoon, but they were still pretty different. So we now have, you know, versions of both the kind of the toy design and the cartoon design in our collections, which is really cool. But this is the first time we're getting, well, that's a little bit of a lie, but the Origins toy line, it's the first time that it's giving us this Lords of Power version of Beastman. Now, as far as Lords of Power and what that is, my understanding is that is that was one of the working names of this toy line back in the 80s before they settled on Masters of the Universe. So back in the earliest days of Masters of the Universe, when they were still contemplating calling it Lords of Power, there were some concept designs floating around for these characters. And Beastman here, he had this very kind of intense, like primal design. Now, I'm just noticing, I have his belt displayed upside down. I should probably switch that around before I continue. Okay, so here he is with his belt right side up, with his armor on. So you can see this armor is pretty intense with these big, spiky, jagged, I don't know what you'd call them. They almost look like teeth or like, what's the word, stalagmites or stalactites in a cave, that would be just grown out of the ceiling. These like rock formations. It's very kind of, savage looking. The face is very intense. He looks kind of a lot more gorilla-like than the standard Beastman. He's pretty scary looking. But otherwise, he's got a lot of parts we're familiar with. He's got the exact same shorts with the belt kind of sculpted in here as both Webstor and Stinkor, except instead of the three-toed feet like they had, he's got the more humanoid feet. So these are the rounded toes like you would expect to see on characters like He-Man, who's got boots on. He's got these unique kind of wrist guards here, sculpted in there. He's got the hairy chest, which we've seen on past versions of Beastman and on Zodak. So while this Lords of Power version of Beastman, has some similarities to the Beastman we all know, in that he's kind of a red, apish type of character, he's quite different from the original. And so in the Origins line, we got a Beastman, which is based on the vintage 1982 toy. We got this in Wave 1. So here is Beastman from Wave 1 of Origins. So this is a lot like the toy that we had in the 80s, and somewhat similar to the look in the cartoon. The cartoon was a little more streamlined. In order to make him easy to animate, he didn't have all the the hair and stuff so much, so it was a little more streamlined. But this is the look we know, and it's pretty different from this one here. Now, in the Classics toy line, like I said, we got a Beastman in 2008 as a PowerCon exclusive. Around that time, maybe 2009, 2010, we got a red repaint of the Classics Beastman. And that all red version, I think they renamed it and called it Red Beast or something. But that was based on Beastman's mini-comic look. Because some of the mini-comic designs, these mini-comics came packaged with characters in the 80s. And sometimes those designs in the comic books didn't really match up with what we got in the actual toy or in the cartoon. So this Lords of Power one does share a little more similarities with that Red Beast figure, in that I feel like the shade of red they've used is a lot closer to that. But design-wise, yeah, this head sculpt and these this crazy chest armor and this belt and everything, that's all stuff I'm not familiar with. I have never seen the concept art that this is based on. I tried to find it online, and I found some cool artwork. However, I don't know if this is truly the concept artwork that this figure is based on, or if this is just some cool fan art that somebody did based on this new figure. But either way, it's a cool design, and in my display, I would imagine these being different characters. Sometimes to have two different Beastmen in my collection, I need to be able to justify the reasoning, and these guys definitely seem like they could be from the same species, but completely different characters. So really cool design. Like it a lot. He doesn't have any accessories other than the removable belt and armor. So he doesn't have a whip, which is what Beastman has usually had with him, dating back to the very first figure. But yeah, it's just a cool design. I like it. And yeah, it's nice to get some of these more obscure looks, these concept looks. So I'm hoping that Mattel continues this in the future. And the last figure that we're going to take a look at today is the Green Goddess, or the Goddess, or the Sorceress. I don't know. This character kind of has many possible names and no names. It's a weird character. So there was no vintage version of this character in the 80s toy line. And that is because she's kind of an amalgamation of certain characters. So if we talk about those mini comics again, I remember the earliest mini comics quite vividly, and there was a scene where He-Man was kind of a savage caveman type guy living in the woods, and then he went out seeking adventure, and he met this character, the Sorceress, and she had this snake armor, she had this green skin, I believe she had the staff and the shield and everything right there in the mini comic, and she gave him all of his weapons, so like the axe and the sword and his iconic armor, and she gifted him all that for him to basically become He-Man. But it wasn't like the old cartoon where he was Prince Adam and he held up the sword and transformed. He was basically already a big muscle-bound guy, and the armor and the sword just kind of, enhanced him a little bit, but he was already essentially He-Man. Also in those mini comics, there was a warrior woman, Tila. So if you see images of Tila, she had like blonde hair, and she had this armor that was, we're used to seeing it now on Tila because she's had the same armor on all of her figures. And this one here, as you'll see in a minute, she's actually got the Tila armor on underneath of this. But when you saw this character here, the goddess / sorceress, in the comic book, you couldn't really see what she had on underneath this snake, hood that she has that covers her whole chest, this whole snake armor. So you have the one woman with the green skin with the snake armor, and then you've got the other blonde with the kind of almost like bathing suit like armor, who fought alongside He-Man. Now, by the time the cartoon came out, they had changed the concept of this a little bit, and the Sorceress was now a character that wore like a bird-like outfit instead of a snake-like outfit. And when the action figure of Tila came out, they took this snake motif of the goddess or the old sorceress, and they gave that snake armor to Tila, even though that was something that she never wore in the cartoon. So this original green character, the green skin went by the wayside, and the armor went to Tila, and the mystical powers went to the sorceress. So this character kind of ceased to exist. She became kind of the other characters. But, Master of the Universe fans are, they love every little bit of continuity, and there was demand for this character to return. And so in the Classics line, we got our first ever Green Goddess figure, and we got a bit of a bio to kind of explain how this character fits into the mythology, separate from the Sorceress and from Tila. So here is the Green Goddess from the Classics line. Now this figure here was just a repaint of Tila. I don't know if repaint is necessarily the right word, because she's cast in this translucent green plastic, which gives her this kind of mystical look. And then the sculpting, though, is all Tila. So you see underneath that shroud, she's got the Tila armor on here, that kind of bathing suit. And she's got this head with this kind of helmet on it with the snake armor permanently attached to it. And yeah, so this is the first time we get the goddess, which is pretty cool. Now I have to be delicate with this one. I don't move my figures around a whole lot. They just stand here kind of static on display. And my goddess is in good shape, but this figure apparently is notorious for breaking because of this translucent plastic isn't very strong. So I'm scared if I try and pose her in any way, she might break. But anyway, so there you go. So here's our Green Goddess for the first time. And now we've got her here in the Origins line. They've also done her in the Reaction figure line. They might have done her as a Funko Pop. She's now just kind of part of the mythology. So that's kind of cool. But this figure here, so let's get a closer look at her. So there you go. You can probably tell before I even tell you this, but this is just a repaint of the Tila figure that we already got in Wave 1, which makes sense seen as the Green Goddess that was established in the Classics line, was just a repaint of Tila. So, very cool. Articulation, it's basically the same as we've seen. Now, the females have a lot skinnier bodies. They're not these big, bulky meatheads like all the guys are. So they do have unique pieces and some unique articulation. Now, actually, if you go back to some of my earlier videos, I talked a lot about the customization available in the Origins line. You can pop their heads off, and their arms off, and their legs off, and you can mix and match characters. Now, at the time, I was reviewing my Tila figure or my Evelyn figure, and I was trying to state that they were equally customizable, but when I tried to pull their limbs off, they had a little bit of resistance, and I didn't want to risk breaking it, and I wasn't positive that the female figures were as interchangeable with their parts as the male counterparts. However, I can confirm, because I made sure to save these this time, but the figures come with these little packages, or these little pieces of paper, which I've thrown out in the past, and they tell you which parts are removable. So with Webstor there, you can see his arms both pop out. You can't take his legs necessarily out of the crotch piece, but he does separate at the boot cut, and you can separate the waist from like the torso. So that's all the articulation for him. Same here with Lords of Power Beastman. Same sort of articulation with Stinkor as well. All the same bits. And then with the Goddess, so here is the Goddess's pieces. So same idea. You can separate her at the boot cut, at the arms, also at the hands. You can separate her at the waist, and you can take her head off. Now, mind you, it doesn't mean you can put her head on Stinkor's body necessarily, because the male and female figures have such different builds. But you could take, the Sorceress or the Goddess's head and put it on Evelyn's body, or, any of the other female figures, She-Ra or whatever. So anyway, I just wanted to touch on that because that was something I kind of omitted in my previous video. So, I talked about this being a repaint of Tila, and here she is. So this is Orton Stila. You see she's got the exact same snake staff. She's got the exact same shield. She actually had the exact same snake armor as well, but I chose not to display her with that because, as I mentioned, Tila never wore that armor. You never saw her wearing that in the cartoons. The only time she ever really wore it was when she was this character, the Sorceress / Goddess in the comic books. So it didn't really make sense to display my Tila that way. However, the snake armor is a cool look, so I am glad that they released this version of the Goddess that now I can display a character that way. And, they don't necessarily look like complete clones of one another because she's got this different armor on. However, the armor does pop off relatively easily. You just undo that, slides off over the head, and there you go. Now you've got a minty green Tila, if you'd rather display her this way. So, very cool stuff. Again, this is kind of an obscure character. You could kind of look at this as two ways. Either Mattel is kind of being cheap and giving us a lot of repaints, figures that are really easy to do, that don't require new parts. This is just a straight repaint of Tila. But you can also look at it as, these are characters that, the fan base, is really excited about. They were really happy when we got some of these obscure characters in the Classics line. And there's probably a lot of fans like me that thought, well, if I don't get this Green Goddess figure, I'm never going to own one because, she's kind of an obscure corner of Masters of the Universe history, and, they're not going to make her again. But here we are. Now we've got another one. And, same as the Lords of Power figures. These are all just weird little odds and ends, and I think it's super cool. So, there you go. That is the Green Goddess. So that is my review of Masters of the Universe Origins Wave 6. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to hit the like button, the subscribe button, and leave me comments as well. That's all appreciated. So I'm actually going to shoot another Masters of the Universe Origins video right now. So if you're interested in this one, you enjoyed it, stay tuned because I'll be posting another video probably within just a couple of days. So I will see you then. Until then, ciao.